And there was a man beside me at dinner, and he had a very sensitive face, sort of long mouth, grey hair, very clever. I could recognize sensitivity being covered up with a pretty bold front. And we got talking, and it turned out he was dyslexic, and he'd left school at 14 in those days, barely, hardly able to read or write. And he went into hotel work, and he thought, what I want is to get an executive job and have a secretary who will be able to do all this for me. And so he did. He ended up in charge of British Rail catering for the whole country, and then for Great Western when it became Great Western Railway. And I admire people who have the courage to cope with a disadvantage on a daily basis. There's a sort of adrenaline rush that wins the Purple Heart, that wins the VC, but there's the unsung heroes, are the people who have some trouble in their life and they face it daily and they just get on with it. They just get on with it. And that's the sort of courage I admire. And I wanted to bring it into a book. Nothing to do with dyslexia, you know,
right.
but that sort of courage.
Wonderful. Well, I see then that that would make a particularly good single novel because,
Yes.
in fact, once you've explored that, there wouldn't be a reason to continue.
They can't, exactly, yes, yes. So, and the Hamish Macbeth ones, it's the same with every book, you know. You start it and you think, I can't do this. I can't do this. I can't.
But you've been enormously prolific.
But what happens is I used to have a sign stuck in my computer screen saying, don't think. As long as I don't think, I'm fine, because the minute you start thinking, what are they going to do next after this chapter? What are they going to do? If you just think of what you've got in front of you, what are they doing now? What's the weather in the streets? What are the smells? You know.
Right.
If you think of the moment, then one moment follows another to the end of the book.
And the end isn't so impossibly far.
Exactly. Whereas if I start thinking about the end, then it's going to dry up.
Well, that was certainly a question I did want to ask you, because your outbook has been remarkable. You've written easily more than 20 books since you took an ocean to writing crime. That's an amazing productivity schedule.
It's I don't have writer's block because I think if one thinks of oneself as being a writer, then I am heading for writer's block. If I think of it as a trade like any other, as a freelance trade like any other, then you just get on with it. And I've discovered the main mental trick to avoid writer's block is just do it. Just do it and don't think ahead beyond the next 2 pages.
Do you think your journalistic training, you know, because when you did have to more or less write to deadline and write to order, you know, that got to be a habit way back, right?
Oh, it was a tremendous training. This was back in the days when the Daily Express had a circulation of 4.5 million readers daily, and you had to be good and you had to be fast, and you had to research things. If the science correspondent was away and you filled in for him, you had to have a mass of facts and bring it down to one very readable set of paragraphs. Yeah, it was marvelous training.
There are a lot of, I think, wonderful writers today, some of the most successful ones, who also were journalists. Michael Connelly, John Sanford over here. You know, and I do think, I've asked that question of other writers too, that people who had to learn to write and report, you know, have an easier time coping with all of the business.
Coping with the stress, yes.
Yeah, I mean, they're able to meet deadlines and be productive without running into block or the kinds of difficulties they think that writers who have not been trained in that hard school, you know, run into.
Yes, that is true. And then it is a way of not taking yourself too seriously, because that's sudden death as well.
It is, isn't it?
Yes.
And I think writing comedic mysteries such as you do, it's really hard to keep it going without letting it become caricature. You know, it's too easy to go over the top with it and lose control.
Well, that's the thing. Never fall in love with your characters, as Nicholas Blake said. Keep control of them. If you fall in love with your characters, you forget about the reader, and the worst thing is to force the humor. I never, ever try to be funny, because the minute you try to be funny, it's not funny.
No, it isn't. The labor shows, and then the reader kind of divorces from it. But I had thought for a while there that you were, really fond of Hamish, and then you would just knock him down, and he'd have to pull himself back together. One final question, since we're running out of time. Have you ever been interested in writing an historical mystery?
No, it was suggested to me when I was writing the Regencies to do a Regency mystery, but that involves a different genre, a different feel to it. It wasn't the Regency genre for me, so I said no. I don't think so. I like modern mysteries, I don't. I like the First of Ellis Peters, for example, but that's about all. I don't really like historical mysteries.
Well, there have been a couple of people writing around your area in mystery. There's a new series with Beau Brummel as the sleuth, which I find very difficult to accept because a less likely man to have exerted himself in that regard than Beau Brummel, I find it hard to imagine.
Poor man was a lightweight and a chronic alcoholic.
Well, and he was bone selfish, and I can't imagine putting himself out. His personality is not such that he could. So I think this is a series only acceptable to people who don't understand the period or Beau Brummel. And then someone else I think has done a good job with Jane Austen as a detective. She's not writing about Jane Austen, but she's using Jane Austen as a character. I myself have always argued whether the Cassandra would have been a better choice. But but I think it was it's sort of like branding to use a recognizable figure makes them more popular. And it's a dicey proposition, I think, to do that. And there is a wave in historical mystery to use real characters, recognizable figures, whether Elizabeth I, that's another one that's come along.
I never did. I remember a Regency where the Prince Regent makes a pass at this beautiful young girl, and I think George Eliot was only interested in grannies,
Yes, he was. It's a mother thing with him, wasn't it?
It was a mother thing. He wouldn't have made a pass at a young girl.
No, you're right. It was in Regency Book, wasn't it? When the taverner is stretched out in the pavilion at Brighton. Yes, I've forgotten about that. No, printing was, I think, no threat to a young girl's virtue.
So I think it's very, very dicey to bring in historical figures unless you're going to portray them as they were.
True. Well, then I guess I'll just have to hope as we close that you might write another Regency romance someday.
Maybe one of these
days. But
I
certainly do want to congratulate you on the success of the Hamish Macbeth series and the Agatha Raisin series, and we will look forward to Skeleton in the Closet, see what else works out. So thank you, Marion.
Thank you very much, Barbara, for talking to me.
It's been a pleasure, and I want to thank all of you for joining us on another episode of the Criminal Calendar.